Welcome everyone to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, More Than Just Good Business, a panel discussion. I will take a few minutes now and ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And I will start with Bernice Crouse, who is the Executive Director of the Franklin County Library System. And Bernice, if you would be kind enough to give everyone a brief overview of your organization's background and how you and your organization's journey led to diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Okay, although one of those things actually connects with one of your questions, so maybe I'll hold back a little bit in that area.
However you want to address it, Bernice.
Okay. We, as a library system, as a public library system, we are in place to serve every resident of this county. And that means to provide the best possible service to every resident of the county. We also reach out to serve other residents of the state. And how we wound up doing, taking some strides in the area of equity and inclusion was, it came into our strategic plan to do so. And I'll hold off on telling how that happened a little bit, but I've been living in Franklin County for years, but I was not born here. I was born in Howard County, Maryland, centered between Baltimore and Washington. And my first decade of life included the race riots and things in Baltimore and Washington, where as a child, I was frightened of things that were going on around me because they weren't that far away. But at the same time, I also grew up in schools that were being integrated and grew up with friends of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. And so I was part of that first generation, I guess, that was really experiencing that. So that's where I come from, and that's where the organization comes from. Our work on this as an organization started in 2018.
Thank you, Bernice, so much. And just moving on in alphabetical order, Dr. Rachel Day, the owner of OneSkin Dermatology. Rachel, if you would be kind enough to do the same, that would be amazing.
Sure, thanks, Kim. So I'm Dr. Day. I'm a dermatologist, and I have a skin health and wellness practice here in Chambersburg, as well as a store downtown called The Good Life. And I'm a little bit unique in that the mission of my practice is radical inclusiveness. And how that came about was formed, I'm a transplant to Chambersburg. I was born in New York City and grew up mostly in New Jersey, and then did all of my medical training in New York City, and came to Chambersburg as my first position out of residency. And I felt like my training didn't prepare me for the real world in terms of operating within a health system, and what that would mean in terms of my ability to practice with the latitude with which I wanted to. And so when I made the decision to open a solo practice outside of the traditional system, I decided to go for broke, and decided that if I was going to construct the most, idealistic space, that I would welcome every and any person that wanted to come and join us in that space, because I had so much to learn. And so that's a little bit about how I wound up here, and I'm excited to share how we operate just on an organizational level and how we hope to serve the community. So thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Dr. Day. And lastly, but certainly not least, David Turner, the Regional External Affairs Manager with West Penn Power.
Kim, thank you. Thanks for having me this afternoon. As you said earlier, I'm David Turner, Regional External Affairs Manager for West Penn Power. And our journey within the DE&I space began about 4 years ago. Our then CEO took it as an initiative to want to create a more diverse and inclusive work environment. And we started doing D&I surveys. And out of that came a number of different initiatives, but that I'll touch on as we get into the questions. And one of those initiatives really began with us creating employee business resource groups, or EBRGs or ERGs, depending upon where you sit in corporate America. It can go by a couple of different names. And I was one of the founding members of one of the first EBRGs. My work in external affairs, and prior to that, I was in talent acquisition for the company. I was always externally facing, always touching different aspects of our community. And in this role now, myself and my team, we are always engaging with our nonprofits, with elected officials and stakeholders. And it's key and critical that we, as a utility that serves every customer, we need to understand all parts of our community. And part of our efforts within the DE&I space that helps us service them better from a foundation perspective, understand their needs from a customer base perspective, but also aids us in being an employer of choice and bringing those folks back into the company. Thank you.
Thank you, David, so much. So shifting into some broader questioning, let's talk about some strategies to cultivating a diverse, inclusive, and equitable organizational culture. So directed to all of you, can you each expand on one or two strategies your business is focused on that have been successful? And I'll let whoever wants to start first and go from there.
I'll hop in, and I think we've seen this. The first thing is commitment from leadership, right? I mean, you can't move your culture forward without the endorsement of your senior leadership and making that a clear part of your overall core values and behaviors and mission statement. So that had to be first and foremost. Second, acknowledging and celebrating the cultural differences that are in your workspace, right? I think so often people use terms like, well, I don't see color, things of that nature. And that's really harmful because who we are racially, ethnically, even from a gender perspective, that's part of our identity. So to not acknowledge that is saying to that colleague of yours, that employee of yours, there's a part of you I refuse to acknowledge. And when you bring that in and you say, I want to celebrate our cultural differences, I want to acknowledge our cultural differences, you leave room for people to come into work and be their full selves, if that makes sense.
I think that's a great point. I am a first-time business owner, for the last 2 years, and for me, it was so important that I provided space to listen and to ask questions and to understand what my employees needed from how I could be a good leader, basically, that I had, the horizon of the organization, but that we all have to be headed towards the same North Star. So how can I make sure that, we share the values that we're sharing with the community, and being really open-minded and not judging what those responses are, even if some of them are not in alignment with my own. And so I think acknowledging how we're different, and in many ways we're more alike than we are different, and then how do we share that? And I really think the critical listening skill, is what I've learned the most over the last 2 years. But you can't listen if you're not asking questions and providing space to hear. So those, I think, and I'm a very small team. We started with 3 employees, myself included. Now we're up to 7. And so that's become even more important as we've doubled in size. Do we still have that same space to be having these conversations on a regular basis to make sure we're all headed in the same direction?
Hey, Rachel, can I hop in? And I just want to say, for smaller teams, it's even more critical, right? I always tell people that that in large organizations, you have a macro culture, what you get from your corporate leadership, your C-suite, but then you have a micro culture that you get from that immediate supervisor. And when you're a small business owner, you are the culture. You know that they're going to take their lead from what they see you demonstrating. So I think kudos to you.
Thank you.
And we are somewhere in between. Before COVID, we had about 70 employees. We're about back to 2/3 of that in size now. But we really, I was going to put this off, but I see it springboarding out of what Rachel said, is we got into this because we started a process for our strategic plan. We do a strategic plan every 3 years and then fulfill it for those next 3 years. And in 2018, we were working on listening to the community for our strategic plan. We started using a new process, a new method from the Harwood Institute that has to do with community conversations to get input. And 3 things came out of that discussion, of those discussions with all segments of the community, is that the community wanted us to be part of the diversity inclusion solution. They wanted us to take a leadership role in it as the library system. And we could see all kinds of possibilities for that. And I will say that I think our 3 goals developed into equity and inclusion, to celebrating those differences in our community, to health, to community involvement. Ironically, 2020 was chosen for health. You can have a little chuckle over that. But 2019, we thought we would take on the diversity, equity, and inclusion area because we thought it was so important. So 2 things that we did early on was a massive in-service day training that completely focused on that topic. Some people in our group today were trainers at that. And that was a real awakening. I was so excited about the positivity that my employees brought to that. But I was also discouraged that there were a couple that I thought maybe didn't belong there in their reactions to the trainings. Actually, they are no longer with us. But so the training was a huge part. Another piece we took on very soon off the block is, I think we had one of the first nonprofit diversity statements in the county. And we have gotten compliments on that as a very positive toned diversity statement. Just got one within the last couple of weeks. We needed a firm foundation, and then we needed to build on that. And we are very willing to say we are still a work in progress. Believe me when I say that. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Bernice. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate the different voices from a organizational standpoint, you know, the nonprofit and the sole proprietor and the corporation. I'm enjoying the conversation. So thank you guys. So to ask some questions individually, and David, if you don't mind my starting with you, is that okay? Great. So allyship in the workplace is a growing topic of discussion for many companies. And so David, how has First Energy worked to educate about allyship amongst your employees?
So one of the things that we've done, and I think kudos to our senior leadership and our Executive Council, Leadership Council, a couple of things. Again, creation of our employee business resource groups. So as a company, we're in 5 states. We have 8 different Ebrgs. Out of those 8 different Ebrgs, they have 1,500 unique members. And if we count overlapping membership, that number bubbles to over 2,000, which is huge. So that means that our employees are engaged, right? And the Ebrgs are open to every employee, no matter where they sit, bargaining unit, exempt, non-exempt leadership. whatever the case may be. And they cover a variety of different things, people of color, veterans, differently abled, LGBTQ, helping women grow, women in leadership. So they address a variety of different issues as it relates to what an employee may be experiencing, either being new to the organization, because we're, again, fairly large, or just as they're going through their career at the company. So the Ebrgs was a huge part of that for us in terms of looking at allyship. And we always say that for each Ebrg, if I take women in leadership and I sponsor one of those organizations, I'm an ally to women in leadership. So I offer mentoring and coaching and things of that nature. We also attach volunteer opportunities to our Ebrgs. So for us, it's a way of us getting our employees more engaged on projects that may be happening outside in the community, whether that's through United Way, whether that's through the LGBTQ Center, whether that's through everything from homeless shelters, things of that nature, where people can get out, become engaged, and they're doing this with folks that they may not normally see on a day-to-day basis. So again, you're building relationships. We also promote the strength of our allyship, what we call speak-up sessions, and the speak-up sessions are similar to, Bernice, what you did with the Harwood Institute, where we did one in the first quarter, and it was around allyship. And we brought in people who are allies to different parts of our Ebrgs, and they talked about their path and what it meant. And those were open to all employees to sign up and listen and provide feedback and input. And then the last thing I'll say, we also do ongoing communication on our portal, right? Our web portal for our employees. Everything from articles to statements from our leadership that continue to stress the importance of DE&I and allyship and what it means to the company.
Thank you. And would you be willing, and hopefully I'm not the only person, I think it's Ebrg. What is that?
Sure. So I apologize.
No worries. I know sometimes in corporations there are acronyms that may not always be known outside of that.
Sure. Employee business resource groups, or something that they're referred to as ERGs, employee resource groups, and what they allow for within your workforce. So if I use, for example, we have one called Women in Leadership, and it's designed specifically for women who are looking to grow their careers, and they're trying to navigate what it means to be a woman in a male-dominated industry. Maybe they have concerns about, how do I balance my work with my home life, and who's going to be a good mentor for me, or who can help coach me in areas I need development. And it's also about creating a community within the organization. As much as we like to think we don't work in silos, large organizations are very silo driven. And it's very easy if you say that, well, I'm the only woman in my department full of engineers, or I'm the only person of color in my department of IT or whatever. So oftentimes those folks are looking for a resource. That's what we call them, a business resource group. It allows for somebody having a level of community where they can talk about issues or concerns or whatever the case may be. One of the best examples I'll give, a colleague of mine had relocated from the Cleveland, Ohio market over into PA. And you don't think about it, if you've never relocated before, you don't think about the simple things of, where do I go grocery shopping? Where's a good barber? Whatever my hobbies are, how do I connect to my community? Resource groups do some of those small minor things that most of us don't think about. And then they get into the other aspects of, how do I grow my career? And, maybe I'm not good at being a public speaker, or whatever that looks like.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to define that for me. I appreciate it. Hopefully it helps some other folks as well.
Sure.
Thanks. And you mentioned women in the workplace, and it's a great segue to my next question for Dr. Day. you know, we know COVID has brought many disparities to the forefront. And one of those is how access to childcare and education affects families, particularly working mothers. So Dr. Day, how have you as an employer started to address or explore ways to meet the needs and well-being of women and single parents in the workforce?
Good question. This was a really, really hard year. We opened October of 2019, and all three of us have children, and acquired 2 more employees over the last year. So 5 out of my 7 employees, we are working moms. And I think the best way to summarize how we've approached it is head on, right? Friction comes when you are when you are in conflict with reality. And so we had to, at various junctions throughout the last year, face what was our reality. Our reality is that we have a team on a day-to-day basis of 5 women who are first responders for their children during a time when school access daycare for many of us, and where daycare may not be available for various reasons, you know, safety, cost, et cetera. And what do we do, right? The first is to, again, listen. What are the challenges that my employees are facing? What are the challenges that I'm facing, right? What is the purpose of our business? What brings us joy? Where is our North Star? And I think the biggest take home from me and from those conversations with my employees and from, you know, with myself ultimately, was we love showing up and being in service for our patients. If we are pulled in 15 different directions, we're not really showing up in our superpower and doing our best job. And so can we just be transparent? Can we just be honest to ourselves and to our patients that, you know, we're going to have to shorten our hours in certain places. We're going to have to make these adjustments because of these challenges that we're facing. And I found that just being very transparent with the struggles as a small, you know, business owner with a workforce of working moms, to say, you know, we don't have afternoon hours on this day anymore because we don't have childcare. We need to have that flexibility in our schedule, has actually gone overwhelmingly well. People want to support us and they understand the challenges that we're facing. It also becomes a cost, right? You're going to bear it on the front end or you're going to bear it on the back end. And I have a team that shows up every single day and gives their absolute best. And we love working together. So is the short-term dollar exchange to have someone in there who's really suffering at home because they're not able to, you know, take care of the necessary things that allows them to be fully present at work? Is that worth the long-term investment in having supported a culture of acknowledging that this might not be our season, you know, to full sprint? This might be the season where we're just kind of plodding along, and that's okay. And being strategic about it and understanding where we have to trim in our budget or what other things we have to do to make sure that everyone is sort of taken care of as a whole person, and that there isn't somebody who doesn't feel that they can show up for their families because they have to show up for us here. So basically, just you have to be in touch with reality, and then you have to make a plan that works with what the reality is.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And Bernice, if I may ask you, while DEI work in an organization cannot rely on policy alone, policies are very important to advancing progress, right? So Bernice, can you share some of your experiences going through the library system's strategic planning process and working on an organizational statement toward this work? You mentioned that.
Yeah. I think it mentioned a little bit earlier, so I'll take it a little deeper. As
Great.
The more that I get into equity and inclusion work, the more I learn myself. And one of the things we've talked about some recently is how we want to move from a point where we're having diversity in the workplace to where people of all persuasions are included in the power structure of the organization, and thus too in the strategic planning of the organization. So one of the things that we have done over the last couple of years as we've moved forward with growing this is that in each year we have taken our strategic planning a step further, our employees a step further to the roots of the strategic planning and a further in the implementation of it. So, you know, like say 6 years ago, when we did strategic planning, the strategic planning tended to come from the top down. And now it percolates up from the bottom. So our employees get a chance to voice their input into that planning process at the very beginning as not just an employee, but a member of the community. And then they get a voice in developing goals and objectives out of that. And two, the board has, our board structure, they participate in that as well and would have some final say in what that is. But it gives every person that works for us a chance to participate in that planning process from the get-go rather than from just implementing it. And that it was a learning curve because they weren't used to that. But we've gotten some really wonderful, wonderful ideas, and it also produces the situation where everybody is ready to grow and develop with a strategic plan. Unlike the first year where we had a couple of employees that turned up for training because they had to, and like every hour of that day, you could tell that they weren't on board. I don't think there is an employee that is not on board with inclusion and equity today. And the ones that weren't, they would have sincerely said that they tried to provide the same service to everybody that came in the door. But that does not mean that the recipient is getting the best service that they can, because some people need different areas of special services in order to get the same outcome. And that's what we were trying to generate there. And as we move forward with strategic planning and continue having community conversations, which this year happens to be the year to have the community conversations for the next 3 years, you know, it will build on itself. And I do not believe that we are in any way, shape, or form done with this as a topic. I feel that we'll continue to be present in our strategic planning for quite a while. And I think it needs to stay prevalent to make sure that our new employees are trained and on board and ready to go with more than just that sameness of service. I mean, yes, quality service is wonderful, but you can't assume that everybody getting the same service. It's like the boxes in the early illustration this morning. It's like we need to put some extra boxes on top for some people to be able to leave the library with the same outcome. So we too struggled with, you know, we're a mostly women operated business, actually, David. Libraries tend to be that way, and the men are in the minority. And as such, we had a lot of women with children in the home during COVID that we had to work around schedules. I mean, many of them were full-time and they worked at different hours of the day and stuff, but that meant that there was somebody on board to help somebody at a time that they might not have been helped before. So it was a learning and growing process there for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernice. And moving the panel back into a question for all of you. Part of DEI work is having an openness to learning and listening to other perspectives. And some of you have touched on that very thing along the way so far this afternoon. And sometimes those things can be challenging for all of us. So what is something that each of you have personally learned along the way doing this work, either individually or within your businesses or organizations? And again, whoever would like to pick up that thread first, please feel free.
I think the number one thing I've learned is that we all have experiences worth sharing, and those experiences definitely shape how we view our work, our communities, in which we live and play. But I think Dr. Day said this earlier. As people share more, you find that there you have more similarities than you have differences. I think that is a truism no matter where you sit, either your work environment, whether it's the library or Dr. Day's practice or me sitting in a large Fortune 250 organization. It really comes down to our ability to take the time to build relationships with our colleagues. So often I feel that we look at our colleagues and you say, oh, I work with this person for 8-10 hours a day, whatever the case may be. But then we have this politeness that occurs that I'm not gonna, ask anything that might be too personal, or I don't know if I really want to know that much about this individual, or I don't want to share that much about myself. And that sometimes that's generational, right? I tend to think younger people are probably a little bit more transparent because of the advent of social media. But I think those of us who are of a certain age or were taught coming up that certain conversations just don't have at work. And I think we live in an environment and a time where you probably should get to know your colleague just a little bit more, and create safe spaces for not just them, but also for yourself.
I think I'm going to sort of piggyback off of that comment. So it became apparent to me that, I have so much listening to do, because if we're not looking left, if we're not looking right, you can't acknowledge where your blind spots are, right? Your open mind is just in front of you, but everybody has blind spots because we all are raised differently, right? We come into the world with a completely different set of, cultural contexts, experiences, et cetera. And in May of last year, we put our mission statement on the front door of the practice. We promise to preserve humanity in the care of you and your OneSkin, irrespective of your age, sex, gender identity, disability, race. And the conversations that I had in patient rooms with the people that I would not expect to be having these conversations with, I was like, I'm not looking left and I'm not looking right enough. That if I'm still shocked by having somebody share with me something, I'm not as open-minded as I thought I was. And there's this, and I said it in the beginning, there's this sense that we have to get it right. And so we're afraid if we do it and we do it wrong, that people will judge us and that will bring shame. It'll be this whole cycle that'll end in terribleness. But it's such a place to grow. I mean, it's so good. And I'm going to use this specific example, but I had a woman in her late 70s come in, and we went through our visit, and I came back in, and the last thing she said is she told me that her granddaughter had just come out, and that she was so afraid for her, and it meant so much to her to see that there were places and spaces specifically for her, that she can't share this with other people, right? Like, she's so afraid to share this with her peer group. But that just that sign gave her some comfort to be able to share it with me. And that she still love, you know, that the love supersedes anything, but she's going through this process of understanding. And I was very humbled, one, that she would share that with me. Two, that it took a while for me to kind of reconcile those two things, and understanding that, you know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it was a totally different context, like Bernice, you sharing your experience of growing up, and that we're not all starting in the same place and space. And so the equity in the experience of going through diversity, equity, and inclusion training, like, we're literally starting on different stepping stones. I'm biracial, so I feel like I'm literally in the middle. I'm not white, I'm not Black. And so I have to learn on both sides, because I've never fit culturally into one norm or the other. So my lens is different. But that if we approach it from a place of humility, that we really all win, right? And it's inviting those conversations. I think we're afraid to invite them, because we're not sure how we'll react or how it will feel. But that if you can push through that discomfort, it gets you to like a much better place.
Oh my, Dr. Day, I couldn't have said the last part there better. But it's funny because we are coming circle in this, because David mentioned in the beginning providing safe spaces for people. And that was a term I had not even heard before last year. I'm so happy to have been introduced to that. And then all over the last 12 months, I have had repetitive training on some different facets of that and building relationships. And this isn't a commercial for the library, but one of the things that I think we did really well between 2018 when we started and when COVID hit was provide safe places for groups to get together and talk about these things in the libraries. And one example is racial reconciliation, which I've become part of and go to the meetings and involved with the work of it a lot now. And people definitely, that is a huge piece, whether we're talking about a small safe space, a safe conversation for somebody to be able to have, as you're talking about, you know, relationships in the workplace and making them a little more personal again, to be understanding with people and hear them out and give them a place where they feel it's okay to tell their story to the other people they work with, or when it's a patron coming in the library for us and they need to share a story in order for you to understand how you can help them. That was one of the big goals of our training and our deeper understanding, was that our staff would all be ready to be those safe listeners when somebody approached them. And it's bearing good fruit. So yeah, safe listening for stories. Absolutely.
Bernice, kudos to you and your staff and the system, because you think about all the different institutions in our communities, whether it's schools or places of worship or wherever that may be. I think if there is one piece of connective tissue that touches them all, it's the library. I don't care where you are on generationally, at some point you're probably walking through a library, right? So whether you're a grandparent taking your grandkids in, or you're a school-age person, or you're a parent, you have some exposure to the library system. So you creating that space, and I had done some work with Harwood a number of years ago. I just know how powerful that can be with training and having those conversations. So kudos to you guys.
Thank you. I actually wore a shirt today that developed out of this. It's one that you can get for any institution and have it personalized to your own organization. And it says, everyone welcome, and everyone welcome. Well, as FCLS libraries, and we actually sort of ran a contest when we started this to try to get people to read books on different areas of diversity, and they had to read and report back on it to get one of the shirts, but it's been a good, we also have badges that we gave out for free, but without a meeting of a goal. But it makes my heart feel good, very good, that my staff is ready and willing to do this. We should be, for that very reason. And everyone is welcome, whether or not they've been used to coming to a library, anytime.
Thank you all so much. I want to make sure that we cover this, probably the last question for the panel. And I encourage you to either answer this from an individual standpoint, or, you know, perhaps from the standpoint of your business or organization, or both, however you choose. You know, I recognize a lot of the folks that are here attending, and many of whom may be in different spots of learning, either individually or within their organizations or businesses. So for the three of you, what is your biggest piece of advice that you would share with the folks attending today from different companies and organizations about getting started with DEI work? Again, either from an individual lens or a lens of from within your business or organization.
David,
And
can I
again,
go
whoever
first?
would like to start.
Yeah, I would like to, because
Go ahead,
I think
please.
Rachel already said it. The one big piece of advice is don't wait. Don't be afraid that you're going to screw it up. Just start. The other thing is get to know people. Make it, if you don't have someone of color or of any other group that you personally know, make an effort to get to know someone and hear their story, because it will change the way that you look at things. Thank you. That's my piece.
Thank you, Bernice. Dr. Day or David, David, you looks like you've unmuted, so I think you're ready to go.
I'm a contestant on Jeopardy most nights. Sorry about that.
You're quick on that buzzer.
I say it's a journey, and the biggest thing is don't look at it as, well, if I get to this point that you have arrived, it's going to be a journey. So with that, be patient with yourself, be patient with others, do the work. There's a ton of different resources out there, whether podcasts or books, that you can really go to educate oneself on. If you're in a leadership position, you know, be an advocate, be an ally. I think that's really key. So educate, read, listen, be patient with yourself, be patient with others, and be open to all perspectives. I think sometimes when we have these conversations around DE&I, people feel like, well, if I'm not completely all on board, that means my opinion doesn't matter. And from an inclusivity perspective, you have to leave room for opinions that you might not agree with. So I would lean in on those areas.
Thank you. Dr. Day, anything you'd like to add?
I agree with all of that, especially the it's a journey part, right? You just keep walking it. I think it's really important to be open-minded with yourself, right? To acknowledge that there are things like we grow up in systems, and then any system, right? Like your household system, your religious system, whatever your systems are, we grow up with many of them that we don't choose. And so to really reflect with yourself and be open-minded as you go through this process of learning, to say, to be in your own agency, right? To understand, like, I believe this and I choose, you know, I'm going to use religion for similar to DEI work, but I agree with this, I agree with that, I'm going to leave that there, and that's okay, but I'm choosing those things. So just make sure as you go through the process of learning, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, that or through that journey, that you're coming at it with your agency, right? That you are like choosing the things, and you're going to choose them from primary experiences, like Bernice said, you know, because you've had interactions that were positive. And so that's okay. That's something that I can bring into that. Or, you know, I feel this way because I had a negative interaction, and that's okay too, right? But you're coming at it from your own agency and perspective, and it's yours to have. There isn't a wrong or a right. It's just, it's your journey. So make sure that it is truly your journey. It's not your partner's journey. It's not your mother's journey. It's not, you know, your preacher's journey. It's like your journey. So you should be the captain of that ship. I agree that there are so many different resources. Personally, I listen. So I like listening to podcasts, right? I like reading. My husband reads a ton. I like reading his cliff notes of things that he's read, having conversations about them. But there's no right way to do it. So try things on, leave it doesn't serve you, but just keep moving.
Kim, maybe this would be a good point to point out that on United Way's website, there is actually a resource list available there. And the libraries have some resource lists, and Racial Reconciliation does, among others, if you're looking for anything from something to watch, to listen to, or to read. There's great stuff out there. Amy Weibly's done so much great work loading United Way's page with that.
Yes, and you can tell that our favorite librarian is making sure to get the resources out to the community. So thank you, Bernice. And I want to make sure we have a little less than 10 minutes. For me personally, I know it's been a great discussion when I forget that I'm the moderator. So I thank the three of you for that. I would love to open things up for anybody to ask questions of the three panelists while we have them here. You can put them in the chat if you'd prefer, or you can just unmute yourself and ask any questions that you might have. Again, either from an organizational perspective or from an individual perspective. Oh, okay, Bernice, you put the resources in the chat. Wonderful. Thank you. Any questions from anyone? Well, I have one, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it again. As the moderator, I often forgot that I was supposed to be doing something. I got lost in the conversation. As you guys have gone through, and you've all mentioned either books or podcasts or conversation, do you have a specific book or podcast that has had a tremendous impact on your individual journey, or within your organization that you saw change maybe the culture within your organization because a number of people had engaged with a particular resource?
I will share. So my husband, I haven't read the book yet, but he read What It Means to Be White, and the author I'm looking up, but it was, and he didn't understand why I would get upset or it hurt my feelings when people would ask, what are you? Right? He's like, they're curious, or it just like, it was like a very big disconnect. And the way the author described needing to have orientation to something that's different in the environment for safety on your own side, it opened up a really beautiful conversation that, like, even 9 years into marriage, we couldn't bridge that gap of him understanding or me being able to communicate, because I couldn't understand. I couldn't really verbalize it. But in reading that passage, I was like, oh, it's because I feel out of place. I'm unexpected in this person's orientation of what the world is supposed to look like for them. And so to give comfort, I have to explain why I'm there. You know, what are you? Right. And so I think that book specifically for us, being a couple that's, you know, of mixed race, and we have mixed race kids, was helpful in growing together and understanding, you know, where his blind spots might be and where my blind spots are, and my ability to communicate my experience or how I'm feeling. So that's a book or a resource that I would recommend, that my husband would recommend at least.
Are you talking about the one by Robin DiAngelo?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Developing white racial literacy. Yeah.
Yes.
A couple that I found particularly meaningful is one by Kathy Obear called "But I'm Not Racist: Tools for Well-Meaning Whites." Shucks, this one's a little different. "My Name is Child of God, Not Those People." That's more on poverty and people of poverty, by Julia Dinsmore. And right now I'm reading "This Is the Fire" by Don Lemon, because I enjoy hearing him on the news so much that when I heard he had a book out, I have flocked to that, and I'm quickly past the halfway mark in that book. Usually I'm getting on my Kindle to see what I was reading over the last year. I do still read real paper books too, but I knew I could get some quick references that way.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bernice. David, did you have anything you wanted to share on that?
So I won't do a book. I'll do a podcast called Race at Work with Porter Braswell. The podcasts are no more than about 35 minutes long in length. So, but each podcast he's interviewing a corporate leader, everybody from tech companies to ad agencies, to people who work in pro sports. And he goes through a series of questions regarding diversity, equity, inclusion. And the way it closes, at least in the first season he did, should you discuss race at work, and since the title, but great perspectives from various thought leaders who've worked in corporate America at very high levels, and what their experience has been in their organizations, their lessons learned. It's probably my favorite podcast I listened to last year.
Oh, that's a great resource. And would you mind repeating the name of the person that?
Sure. Porter Braswell, Race at Work.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Easily digestible over the course of 35, 40 minutes.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, I want to take a moment again and thank Bernice and Dr. Day and David for agreeing to serve on the panel today. I hope that everyone took as much away from their very open and transparent conversations with all of us as I did.